Hello, this is Geotech and today I'll be taking a look at Ubuntu 20.10, but this time I'm going to be taking a look at the Raspberry Pi 4 edition. And this edition is exciting because it's one of the first few GNOME 3 based OSs for the Pi 4. And so I decided why not take it out for a spin and test to see whether this is a good OS for the average user, meaning someone that's going to be using it for web browsing and maybe doing some basic office productivity work like using LibreOffice. I'm also going to take a look at whether this OS can be used for basic content creation, meaning can it do some screen recording and can you edit videos using Kdenlive. So let's take it out for a spin. If you like my content, you can subscribe to me on YouTube, PeerTube, and you can follow me on Odyssey. Alright, so here we have Ubuntu 20.10, and before I sign in, I'm going to mention that I do have the option of signing in using Ubuntu on Wayland, but I'm actually going to stick to Ubuntu on Xorg, and I'll tell you why in a moment after we test Ubuntu on Xorg here. GNOME 3 compared to other desktop environments typically found on the official Raspberry Pi OS and even Manjaro's XFCE, GNOME 3 is much more heavier when it comes to resources. So the very first thing you'll notice is that when you open up applications, they do run a little bit sluggishly compared to Manjaro and Raspbian's OS for the Raspberry Pi 4. You'll notice it especially here when navigating through the apps here. But otherwise, it's still quite usable. So the first program I'm going to test here is LibreOffice Writer. Overall, LibreOffice runs good, maybe just a little bit slightly laggy compared to LibreOffice on Manjaro and Raspbian OS, but otherwise still very much a similar experience. So now let's test the web browser here. A big benchmark you could say is whether it can load YouTube videos properly, and at the very least in 1080p. So again, in general, you'll find some lag here, but I don't think it's a deal breaker for a lot of people, considering that the fact that the Raspberry Pi only costs $35. So far, the experience on the Raspberry Pi is exactly what you'd expect, except that now you're using a much nicer, a much more modern looking GNOME 3 desktop environment here. Of course, programs like OBS are not working for ARM devices yet, but I do have Simple Screen Recorder that we can try. So I'm just going to do a recording, and actually notice that when I am running Simple Screen Recorder, the whole system goes to a crashing halt almost, and I get this little error. That's just because the OS just can't handle the recording, and I think part of it is because it is running GNOME 3 and it is more resource intensive. When I tested it on Manjaro for the Raspberry Pi 4, I was actually able to record pretty good. I mean, I did notice some lag as well, but it didn't crash in the same way Ubuntu 20.10 did here. So I'm going to open the folder, and here's the video. Alright, and so then the big test here, it's going to be using Kdenlive here for all my fellow Linux content creators. Last time when I tested this on Manjaro, it was working pretty good, so let's see if I can duplicate the experience here. I'm going to add a transition maybe, just so you can know that it was edited by me here. I actually don't know if the wipe will work. I'm actually curious to see the results here. Let's try the cloud here, then render. I'll leave it as untitled, then I'll up the threads here. Actually running pretty decently. just a couple seconds. I mean, it is only a 9-second video. I think I may actually run into an issue playing it. I'm not sure if MP4s work okay here. Yeah, I need some decoder, so I'm wondering if I can render this in a different format here. Maybe VP9. Let's try it as a WebM. It's gonna take longer, but that's expected. Alright, so I skipped the video here till the very end of this render. I did notice this last time that it kind of got hung up on the last 2 seconds, but overall the video was completed. Let me see if I can actually open it here. Awesome, looks like it's actually gonna open it on video here with the WebM file. And I don't think it actually loaded the wipe feature. I guess the effects don't work, but otherwise you're able to at least do some light video editing here. So yeah, I guess the transition didn't apply, but at least you were able to cut and trim the video. So that's at least working. Okay, so far what we can conclude is that Ubuntu 20.10 can be used as a daily driver if you only need the basics, like basic web browsing and using an office writer. And so far, Raspbian, Manjaro, and Ubuntu all have pretty much given you a very similar experience, except GNOME 3 may have a little bit more lag. No, slightly but noticeable lag. But I think visually it looks a lot nicer, but that's just me being a fan of GNOME or GNOME 3. But before I leave and turn this computer down, I'm actually gonna log out and sign in with Wayland here. I noticed that the OS runs a lot smoother, and that's a very promising sign because Wayland of course is the future. And I was excited because I was going to see, wow, this is actually a pretty decent experience. And especially when I opened up LibreOffice, you get some weird issue with it opening up and then kind of disappearing and then reappearing. So a few things here. When I was testing my Logitech wireless keyboard, it wasn't typing anything. And so I thought, does Wayland not work with keyboards here? And I was able to type with my mechanical keyboard, so that's interesting. And I thought, okay, no big deal. I just got to work out the kinks with the keyboard here with Wayland on ARM. And I was excited because now I was going to test the browser, but I ran into an interesting issue here. The window appears pretty much corrupted here, and I'm unable to actually use the web browser. And same thing with Kdenlive and probably a lot of other applications. That's a bummer, but at the same time, given how smooth Wayland is running on GNOME 3 here on ARM Wayland, I think this is a good sign for the future. So there you have it. It's good to see Ubuntu 20.10 running just as good as other Raspberry Pi OSs like Manjaro and Raspbian OS. With GNOME 3, you do get slightly more lag, but overall, and this may be biased because I love GNOME 3, it looks a lot more modern and visually appealing, I think. So it's good to see this OS running well. And it's good to see that we're seeing a lot of OSs starting to run on ARM devices, especially with Apple releasing their ARM-based CPU. Because I gotta be honest, it's very powerful and efficient. And I feel like it's good to see other OSs starting to take advantage of ARM hardware. You have the team over at Elementary working on a Pinebook Pro version of their OS. And then you even have the team at Zorin working on their own version of the Raspberry Pi 4. So we're seeing a lot of options with Linux on ARM hardware. And I think all of that is a very good sign of the future. But let me know your thoughts. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like my videos, please like, share, subscribe. And I will see you all next time.